I have a question for you. Who do you think are the top 10 film directors of all time? Well, in this video, I'm going to give you my picks for the top 10 film directors in all of history. Hello everyone, and welcome back to the Adam Kiss Show. I know it's been a while since I've uploaded an episode. I've had a lot of exciting things going on. My feature film, My Last Words, won a whole bunch of awards from film festivals. It's been great seeing it screened all over, winning a bunch of Best Actor awards for myself, a bunch of Best Director awards as well. So it's just been super exciting. And then in addition to that, I recently filmed my feature film, Good Night. That's Good Night with a K. And it's very different to My Last Words is more of a romantic drama, and Good Night is more of a neo-noir mystery thriller. And I'm currently in post-production with that, so that's all really exciting news. But today, I wanted to talk about the best directors in all of history. And perhaps I started thinking about this because I started getting all these director awards, and I started thinking, what does it mean to be a great director? What does it really mean? Because sort of like a film producer, in a lot of ways, people don't really know what a director is or what a director does. I mean, there's certain core things that basically every director does or is supposed to do, or should do, I should say. But honestly, it's such a wide scope of things, just like a producer in many ways. Like a film producer, nobody really knows what they do. It really depends on the producer. You kind of make your own path in that field. Same thing with a director. And as a director, producer, writer, actor, editor, myself, I get it. Like all of those roles have, it really depends on the person who's filling them more than, a specific label for what they do. It kind of, they are what you make of them. But in terms of directors, you have totally different types of directors out there. You have very hands-on directors. Some directors, have to be in control of everything, the minutest detail, that they stage everything beforehand. They just tell the actors what to do, where to stand, how to say the lines. They give line readings. So there's directors like that who storyboard everything, and you're just essentially fulfilling exactly their vision, and they hire the actors specifically to fulfill their vision. Like some directors who people might consider like that would be David Lean, or a famous example is Stanley Kubrick. People like that. Not to say that they were always rigid, but that was their style. And then there's a whole other style of directors, directors maybe more like John Huston, who just kind of cast the piece and they kind of leave the actors alone to sink or swim, essentially. Essentially not sink or swim, but they kind of let the actors do their thing. John Huston famously said that 90% of directing is casting. I believe he said that to Michael Caine. I heard that in an interview once. But so those are really the two types of directors. And then there's directors all the way in between. It's really a wide spectrum. Those are some extreme examples. But yeah, so I would say that in no particular order, let me start the list of my top 10 film directors. I would say Orson Welles definitely has to be on there, perhaps because I relate to him. He was also an actor, a director, writer as well, producer. So he also, like me, enveloped all those different parts. Now, depending on different points in his career, at some point he was just an actor, at some point he was just, writer, director, producer, etc. But there's several occasions when he did all of them. Obviously, most famously, when he was 26 years old, he made Citizen Kane, which he directed, starred in, co-wrote with Mankiewicz, I believe. And I believe, he was very much involved with the production. He had really an unprecedented deal where he had creative control and final cut, and that's something that he didn't have later in life, interestingly enough. In certain ways, Orson Welles really started at the top, and, it's very hard when you start at the top, because how could somebody possibly top Citizen Kane, for a second film? And especially the fact that later on in his career, really after Citizen Kane, he was really distrusted by the studios because Citizen Kane was not necessarily a huge financial success immediately. Obviously, later down the line, it was, and the critical reaction to it just kept increasing as the years go by. But later on, he wasn't given that final cut. The studios didn't trust him. They often re-edited his films, didn't invite him back into the editing room for the last part of post-production. There's a lot of stories like that. I know a famous example, The Magnificent Ambersons is one example of that, where they recut it. Another one is A Touch of Evil with Charlton Heston. And Orson Welles himself, which is, interesting. That's a very interesting film. But you think of these films, and you think of how different they might have been if Orson Welles would have had the final cut in them. It's just something that I think about often, is like how different we might even think of Orson Welles. in a certain way, a lot of those films that he made, like Touch of Evil, Magnificent Ambersons, those are all great films. But you think, would they have been even great? Could they have been even greater if Orson Welles was given creative control? You never really know. But he was just an absolute visionary. I think it's one of those cases where he accomplished so much, and then you think, what if? What if he would have had more control, ability to do more projects? I know later in life he had several unfinished projects. He basically tried to self-fund things. Like he had this Don Quixote project, he had The Other Side of the Wind, which I believe was completed in 2018, so, 50 years after it started filming. So he had a lot of things like that, a lot of projects tied up with, various stages of production, development, hell, as you call it in the film industry. But absolutely, he was a fantastic director, one of the greatest of all time. And I would say that one of the things I admire about directors in the modern day, oftentimes directors have a certain niche, like this director only does, gangster films, or this director does crime films, or this director only does, indie art house films, things like that. And people have a certain style, both visually and with the script, creatively, the look and feel of the film. So oftentimes when you're watching a film, you might say, oh, this is, a gangster film. This is this director. Oh, this is a romantic comedy. This is definitely in the style of this director, without even seeing the credits. But what I admire often in directors is versatility. I like, especially in the old school, in the 30s, 40s, 50s, you had a lot of directors who did a whole bunch of different types of things. And that's something I really admire. Like Michael Curtiz is one. He was actually from Hungary. He Americanized his name to Michael Curtiz. From the Hungarian equivalents. I'm Hungarian myself, so I immediately recognized his original Hungarian name. But basically, he did all kinds of things, from Errol Flynn swashbuckling movies, Captain Blood, things like that, to Elvis Presley movies, musical type things, King Creole, to Casablanca, one of the greatest films of all time. And that he was really, in my opinion, probably the greatest director of the studio system of movies. When the studio was in control, they would whip out movies all the time, constantly. It was like a factory. And in a certain way, that's bad. And in a certain way, that's wonderful. Because in a certain way, way more movies were getting made. And honestly, the heads of the studios in those days, they were not necessarily run by committee. They were run by, one person or just a couple people who could make creative decisions and go out on a limb. Whereas today, it seems like, that's not so possible, unfortunately. So Michael Curtiz is definitely one of the greatest directors in my book. Another one in that similar vein of directors who are more versatile would be Howard Hawks. He directed things. What did he direct? Bringing Up Baby, a slapstick comedy. He directed a bunch of westerns with John Wayne. What's another one? Only Angels Have Wings with Cary Grant. He did all kinds of things, whether westerns, The Big Sleep, a noir film, a film noir with Humphrey Bogart. All kinds of different things, and that's something that I really admire. Someone who can, go from doing a dramatic film to suddenly doing something like Bringing Up Baby, a total silly slapstick comedy. That's just something I really admire in any director, and so he's definitely created so many classics. He definitely has to be on that list. Another one, without question, would be Alfred Hitchcock. His name is synonymous with cinema. So many great, in particular, those Hitchcockian style films. And speaking of directors who are versatile, Hitchcock sort of did stick into one niche, and that's fine. In a certain way, like I said, there's all kinds of directors. There's no one way to be a great director. Some directors branch out and do all kinds of things, and some directors stick to one thing. And, I think that either one is valid. Hitchcock certainly didn't just stick to one type of film. Something like To Catch a Thief is completely different from Psycho. Even though they certainly have similarities. The one thing in common is Hitchcock films are always extremely entertaining. I think he valued the audience entertainment factor more than the critics, which honestly is the same way that I feel. So I think, he was just an absolutely fantastic director. I think North by Northwest is one of my favorite Hitchcock films. I mentioned To Catch a Thief. That's not one you hear about too often, but it's one that I absolutely love. It's just real entertainment. It makes you... It's escapist entertainment, perhaps. And that kind of started with the 39 Steps, I think, which is honestly a precursor to North by Northwest, in my opinion. And honestly, from the mid-30s on, I've really appreciated his work, especially, when he came to America. Honestly, I've seen most of his films from that point onward, in addition to the 39 Steps, of course, which was still in his British era. But just an absolutely fantastic director, one of the greatest directors of all time. Another one would have to be Ingmar Bergman, the famous Swedish film director. He's certainly one of the greatest film directors of all time, one of the greatest filmmakers of all time. He did a lot of smaller personal movies, what you might call art house films in this country, but it's very much my style. I think The Seventh Seal is one of my favorite of his movies. It's essentially about a knight playing chess with death once he returns from the Crusades. It's a really interesting movie. He has a lot of religious symbolism in his films, which I really appreciate. A lot of Christian themes, I really appreciate that. I think he's just an overall, The Seventh Seal is a masterpiece. Wild Strawberries is a masterpiece. What other films? Summer with Monica is an interesting film. Smiles of a Summer Night is his version of a comedy, which is really just a delightful film that was made into the musical by Sondheim called A Little Night Music. But just delightful films, really. Some of them are extremely serious. I would say even his comedies or lighter films have a serious message. I think other than that, that's I'm thinking on the European side now. I think I mentioned John Huston before when I was in my intro talking about styles of directors. And I think, he directed The Maltese Falcon, so many other incredible, The Treasure of the Sierra Madre, just off the top of my head, two of my favorite films. The Treasure of the Sierra Madre and The Maltese Falcon both star Humphrey Bogart. Humphrey Bogart was a good friend and collaborator of John Huston. They worked together well. They were good buddies. All of that. And I think that those are two great American films. They definitely would have to be in the top 5 or 10 greatest American films ever made. The Treasure of the Sierra Madre, Humphrey Bogart, that's kind of a story about greed and what it does to you, and it's kind of a psychological study in a way. And then The Maltese Falcon is the quintessential film noir. So on the strength of that alone, he did so many other great movies. He did, I forget the name of it, but the one with Robert Mitchum, where he's stranded on an island during World War II. And then there's the woman who plays the nun. I forget her name as well, but she was also in An Affair to Remember with Cary Grant. Deborah Kerr, I believe. Deborah Kerr and Robert Mitchum. That's a great movie as well. Really, he did so many great movies over the years, so he definitely has to be on my list. Another one would have to be Billy Wilder. Probably one of the greatest comic directors of all time, one of the great screenwriters of all time, honestly. I believe he's tied or somewhere around there for the most Oscar nominations for Best Screenplay. And he definitely deserves it. He did a bunch of versatile things as well. Speaking of versatility, from, noirs like Sunset Boulevard and Double Indemnity, all the way to, things like Some Like It Hot, The 7-Year Itch, comedies like that. He's more well known today, I would say, for his comedies, though, Double Indemnity is a very famous movie, so is Sunset Boulevard. But he had this really magical touch to his films, which I really appreciate. Another one I mentioned before was David Lean. He did all kinds of huge epic movies, some of the most epic movies in history, honestly. Lawrence of Arabia, Dr. Zhivago, Bridge on the River Kwai. Those are probably his 3 biggest, probably some of the best movies, although one of his favorite movies of mine, I should say, is Brief Encounter, a very smaller movie from, I believe, released 1945. Maybe it was filmed in 1944, towards the end of the Second World War. And it's a simple love story, beautiful story, written by Noel Coward, one of the great British playwrights, actors, all of that. And he's just absolutely, I just love his style, because to a small love story like that, he brings such grand elements. Obviously, it's helped by the wonderful soundtrack of the Rachmaninoff Second Piano Concerto. But then to these great, big, epic stories, he brings such a personal touch. So I just love the dichotomy of that with him, and I think he's one of the greatest directors ever. Let me see. So Stanley Donen would have to be my next pick. He started out co-directing with Gene Kelly, Singing in the Rain, a bunch of those kind of things. And then he did one of my favorite movies, Charade, with Cary Grant and Audrey Hepburn. Absolutely fantastic movie. As a matter of fact, people call that the most Hitchcock movie that Hitchcock never made. It's very much in the style of something like North by Northwest, except the roles are reversed, where the woman, Audrey Hepburn, essentially plays the Cary Grant part, where she's confused and, being all twisted in the story. And Cary Grant plays a part where you don't know if he's a good guy or a bad guy until the very end. It really keeps you guessing. I think that's probably my favorite Donen film. He did a bunch of other later comedies as well, which I liked. I just love his carefree style, honestly. And then finally, I would probably have to say William Wyler. He directed such classics like Ben-Hur, The Best Years of Our Lives. Again, this is a theme with me. I like often I like directors who are very versatile. You know, The Best Years of Our Lives is like a drama about soldiers coming back from World War II. Ben-Hur is a big Roman epic. I think he did Funny Girl as well. He did a whole bunch of other things. Really interesting movies, really different kinds of styles, and a very, very, very interesting director in my book. Obviously, you can't really have a list of the 10 greatest directors ever because it's a matter of opinion, and my opinion would probably change day by day. But some other great ones that I can think of are Victor Fleming, who directed Gone with the Wind, The Wizard of Oz, a lot of other films, a lot of Clark Gable movies in particular. He was his buddy. Then there's, Godard and Truffaut, The French New Wave. Those were incredible films, Breathless, À bout de souffle, Jules et Jim. Those are just magical, incredible films. I mean, John Ford is another one, Fellini, if we're talking about Italian films. There are just so many great directors out there. But this was a list of some of my favorites, at least today. Thanks so much, and see you on another episode of The Adam Kiss Show.